Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, I've been recently hearing the insult of Muslim women wear trash bags going around a lot. It seems to be popularized now amongst the far right Western Christians. Okay, Lauren Southern and Sydney Watson, Looney Laura Loomer. She's a J, but that crowd have been saying trash bags, trash bags, trash bags, pillowcases, bed sheets, all this type of nonsense. And then I paused and thought to myself, how many times do I have to bring this up? Where you have to educate a Christian on their own garment history. And if you look at all the different cultures where even women would have a veil and of different lengths, different colors, the covering of the hair with a bonnet, some type of garment that covered the hair, and where necklines were not exposed. And so, what I thought was interesting was, I need to start archiving more of them, but if you go through, I included some of the pictures at the beginning of the video, where you just go through and you look at how Christians used to draw and depict their spiritual women. And then you look at today, they're nothing like that. So, and then they use AI art to just kind of really undress Mary. When before she was completely covered and showed her face. Throughout all kinds of cultures, and then the Virgin of Guadalupe, you would see her covered up. Constantly, you would see the women covered up. Throughout the ages. Unless they were a heathen pagan cult, such as the others, right? And so Catholics and Christians and Mormons, they just really used to embrace feminine clothing. But if you look at Candace Owens, for example, she does wear a lot of pantsuits. She's a very modern, working Catholic woman, and you think, very fashionista, but still sitting down, having tough conversations with men, using a nanny, different things. I'm not trying to slam her entirely, but I'm just trying to show you the different cultures and how it is now. Allie Buckley is another one, and let's take, for example, the redheaded libertarian. She did a conservative calendar where the women were doing pin-up poses and whatnot. She was baking a cake and doing and she's always showing her cleavage. And on the back of the wall, there was a cross. And if you just go through what makes a Christian today, it's just someone wearing a cross like a sort of ornamentation. They don't actually have to dress modest. If you told a Christian woman today that she had to wear, long sleeve clothing, not expose her neck or chest, and has to wear dresses to the ankle, she would call you an oppressive, misogynist, yada yada yada, chauvinist. They would freak out. Meanwhile, they always want to depict themselves as super, super spiritual. And I found this kind of weird, because to me, the more spiritual you become, the more you kind of peel back the layers of hedonism. And the Eastern Orthodox nuns wear all black, like the women of Iran. And if you took away their rosary, their crosses, and you stood them side by side and asked the common person which one's the Christian, which one's the Muslim, you wouldn't really be able to tell. And then even if you put their clothing the same colors, you'd begin to see some of the differences there and how they used to cover. And then I started thinking about, the black? And then you find, tons of those Christian women wear black. So, and then you change the color, they still call it oppressive. You change the variation, the fabric, different styles, still oppressive. And then you begin to realize they're calling their own religion oppressive. And then you see the modern Christians are changing the dress codes of their religion to satisfy the porn needs of their men. Because if those men actually cared to make women more pious, they would say that the dress codes matter, but the Christians are so rebellious that they think a man can't tell them what to wear, even though Christianity is supposed to be a patriarchal religion. And I think when Christian men in the UK see a Muslim woman in loose clothing, similar to how Christians used to be, they become very, very angry. And I think they have this sort of Black Mirror effect into their own consciousness that they can't control their women. Their woman dominates them. She can't be saddled. She'll buck you right off, right? And one of the prides of having a marriage is where it's harmonious and you get along and you understand each other's needs. But when you have a sort of Jezebel Christian who's very, very modern, very, very feministic, you're like, okay. And I think someone should just do an experiment where you go to different denominations of Christianity and you see how the women are dressed. And I do find it peculiar when people say hair isn't sensual. And it's like, it's part of what adds beauty, because if she was bald versus having a nice head of hair, you would depict her as like a 5 or 0 to all the way to a 10 or 12. And hair is a sign of health, right? And covering the hair is reducing some of the allure, and it is reining in some of the aura. And so, what I find fascinating is that the Christians insult Islamic modesty, which was what Christians used to value. And so, in society now, Muslims, especially Muslim women in particular, they're the ones who keep modesty alive. When UK Christians say assimilate, what they mean is dress with your cleavage, put on some yoga pants, show your camel toe to strangers, show your belly button to every guy that passed by, cuck your man on the regular. See, Western culture is cucking. That's what Western culture is. Because if you really looked at how the Christian woman dominates her husband, and how if you told her she had to wear long skirts and a blouse that reaches up to the neck and she couldn't show some chest, she would literally feel very ugly. Christian women depend upon showing their sensuality to men, and that they want to dress. If you type in Christian clothing on Etsy, you're not gonna get the same religious clothing. You type in Muslim clothing, you're gonna see a huge difference. And you can't argue with Muslims and say, no, you guys aren't modest, modesty is this or that. Cover up the body. Cut off the sensuality. You're married. Okay? How can you call how Muslim women dress trash bags when Mary is depicted in that way? And historically, those Christian women, when they're walking in the desert, when they're on the prairie, they have some type of thing covering their hair. Also kept their hair cleaner from not getting dust and whatever else in it, because if you didn't have a paved road and you are walking behind a wagon and it's a dusty day, you're getting sand and debris all up in your hair. Hair covering keeps a lot of stuff out of there. And if you're sleeping in a place where there might be lice, it helps those critters stay off you, especially if you're near animals who have fleas and other stuff like that. And if you're traveling, it also helps to keep some of that sun bearing down off of your, like, it's not on your scalp, just like roasting you. And so it's fascinating just how much they demonize a head covering. And they say assimilate. And I'm thinking to myself, still, someone did a video where they went downtown in London and just showed how many women dress like hookers, and you're like, that's what you want the women to go into? Go back 200 years. How were women dressing? And then I recalled a video I watched where they went from like 17th century fashion to today's fashion, and you see how much it's changed. But for a long time, women had dresses and they added in that artificial cage to not show the shape of your legs. And they had their hair was up in a bun, and they had so it wasn't down, and then they had these large hats, and still the dress went all up buttons, and then they wore gloves and then frills on the edge of their wrists, and they were covered, and they still wore tights. Like, there was layers to their clothing, and that was still more modest than the modern Christian today. And then you look how Hollywood and them slowly got the Christian to undress. And I think it started with the Disney princesses, specifically the Little Mermaid. Okay, and then you look at Mulan, the Chinese Disney cartoon, where the literal song is "Be a man, you must be swift as the coursing river, be a man." And so the Chinese girl is being taught to be androgynous, and she's rebelling against becoming beautified, and her being more masculine and cutting off her hair. And this was how she got Chen, I think his name was. And that's a very puzzling thing. So there's a lot of psychological symbolisms behind this stuff. But think about how Cinderella had gloves and a pretty dress, but even when she was scrubbing floors, she was still modest, right? It's just quite fascinating looking at how the Christians of the West have let go of modesty. I recall a reel that I saw where kind of chubby, busty, blonde, she had a golden necklace on with a cross. And she went like before church, and she's like crouching. And then she goes after church. And like the buttons popped off her blouse. And like shoulder cleavage. And she still has the cross there. And then she turns the camera over to her mom, who's giving her the stink eye. And I think that encapsulates perfectly the American Christian woman. And if you go to vintage texts, just how those women were, and you see how the Amish women of the past, they were not really into exposing at all. But it's the modern ones that, like Turning Point USA and others, where they're encouraging women to really leave the home and enter the workforce, free mix, wear a lot of makeup, adorn themselves, be alone with men in the office, spend lots of hours commuting, and put your kids away at the daycare. And then you're like, so no wonder why these Christian women who've not really picked up their Bible haven't looked at their art history, because you can tell a lot about the history of a religion through its art. Now, Islam has a different history, obviously, but you can see how Christians were wearing way different clothing than they are today. And it always surprised me when I would go to some churches and you would just see some women dressed really lewdly. Just not too long ago, I saw a wedding at a Catholic church, and women who were the bridesmaids looks like they were going out to the club. I mean, the men are dressed with a nice suit, they're looking good, looking fresh. The women, I couldn't see any modesty. Super tight, almost like they stuffed their fat into these clothing. Like their zippers were just gonna burst. And it's quite sad, like you have no shyness. And I think that's what really leads to quite a lot of adultery. And so I really respect how us Muslim women who actually put on the hijab and wear loose clothing and retire all that are carrying the heavy load that the Christians of the West abandoned. And if you look at the modern Christians raising their kids on Nickelodeon, Disney, Disneyland, the generations of Taylor Swift, Miley Cyrus, you see like, oh, well, they put their kids in front of the TV, and then the TV would have commercials every few seconds, and it really eroded their faith. And so I think it's important that no Muslim woman feels shame and feels like she doesn't belong in the West because she doesn't want to assimilate into sexy red, Cardi B, Nicki Minaj culture, because Western culture is that licentiousness. It is brothel culture. It is Miami nightclub, all that. That is America. And that's what fuels part of the drug crisis, the abortion culture, and mass cheating. I mean, trying to get a Western woman to stay loyal or a man is exceedingly difficult. And I think that's one of the main causes of that is the lack of modesty, because women are walking outside in a sea of arousal. And then there's some men are so overly stimulated with what they see, they no longer have a libido and have to take Blue Chew and other substances. And so they actually have erectile dysfunction because they've gotten so accustomed to the nudity that now they need weirder and weirder things. And then you see the passport bros movement, where they have this hypocrisy of use and abuse the horrors of America, but then fly over to another country, swoop up a village girl, and bring her to America in a totally different culture where she's going to have some culture shock and be with her. Or some of them actually just use those women and then abandon them with STDs and pregnancy and come back to America and disappear. Because impoverished girls get impressed when an American tourist flashes around some money, because American money, when converted to their currency, is a lot. And so they seem to be a high roller when in America they're actually quite a bum, both financially wise and both ethically wise. But to a young village girl, she doesn't really get it, and then she gets used and abused. And so the culture of immodesty in America makes the men rotten, makes the women rotten, and when Christians are antagonistic towards Muslim women for covering our hair and whatnot, we just have to realize that there's this deep innate hatred that these people have of how far they've fallen. They've fallen so far to the point where their women, if you told them they had to cover their hair, their self-esteem would literally evaporate. The amount of Christian women who thirst trap online is also strange. Getting married in backless wedding dresses. The amount of them who drink wine and then wear very low shirts and go to wine gatherings with men while their husband's at work. You just begin to see, because Jesus drank wine, so we can drink wine. You're like, huh, what really makes these women religious? And then, for example, you can probably find it still, there was a young girl who was wearing a skirt. She was under the age of 18. It was pretty short, and a woman simply reached over and tugged to pull it down a little bit because it was sliding up. And I think she's going to serve some jail time for assault. Simply for you shouldn't put your hands on somebody, but she was just helping her to pull her skirt down because it was hiking up and she's a minor. And so the women in the comment on Instagram, they were like, oh, that's horrible, why would you do that, mind your own business. But then you're like, okay, so you're encouraging this minor to flaunt it to men, but then you want to lock the men up if they see it. What is going on here? So there's no real accountability for some of these women. And the Christian women will take a woman like in black clothing of Iran or Saudi and be like, look how oppressed they are. But then you're like, so you're telling me some Catholic nuns or Eastern Orthodox Christian women, when they wear black, are they oppressed? Oh, it's their choice. Not really, because that's the uniform of the job, right? Can a priest can a cardinal go to do his job without wearing his robes? Can he wear a Speedo and some nipple pasties that have little dangly stuff on them? Can he go to the Vatican in that? No, there's a dress code, right? A religion is voluntary. You choose to be in it. And it used to be, before the rainbow cult religion took over, that you couldn't have public nudity. Now gay men can paint their ween rainbow colors and smack each other's butts and have kinky foreplay on the middle of the street. Thanks, secular liberal atheists. And Christians allow it because separation of church and state. That's okay, but if a Muslim woman covers, that's not assimilation, that's not welcome in the West. Nun wears it, oh, that's Western. Muslim wears her clothing, not welcome. So their standard is inconsistent, and that is what we have to hammer at. So as Christians fade and get farther and farther away from the rules of their own religion, and Muslims, we stick heavily to what the Quran and Sunnah depict, and we have our own cultural expressions as well. Like the Muslim women of Turkey may have something they do, the Muslim women of China, of Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, everyone has their own little spice, which is halal. I mean, we don't all have to be Arabized, because Islam isn't it's an Arabic language, but it's not a religion just for Arabs. But you just want to make sure you're not imitating the disbelievers, right? So there seems to be a braided line of boundaries and wonderful expressions that we can navigate and explore when it comes to Islamic clothing, So think about how if you have Sharia-abiding Muslim women, the modesty is extremely high, okay? And with modesty, there's less sexual tension. This doesn't mean all men will be good. And feminists will seethe against this because some of them are very well aware of the power they have over men and over bisexual and lesbian women when they can use their temporary beauty as a force, as a manipulation tool. And that's why I think it's fascinating how if you really examine what beauty and allure and sensuality is, you'll see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only gives it to us for a temporary time. And how you use that, you will be held accountable for. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your intentions. He knows you better than you know yourself. So you're not going to get away with anything. So when you see Looney Laura Loomer, Paul Joseph Watson, Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, and Callum, who used to do his Lotus Eaters podcast, they seem to pretend that the UK really values Christianity, and that the way Muslim women dress is inappropriate. You're like, so you're not calling to outlaw dressing like Sexy Red or Cardi B in public, but you're calling for women to not be able to cover their hair, which is how Mary is depicted in your own religion. That's quite strange to me. Quite strange. So keep hammering that home, because there is no form of modesty better than what Islam gives to women. And these men, I really do think that they're into wife swapping. They don't really have that masculine protective energy to kind of cover their women, and they're just very hedonistic. I think maybe they allow it because they feel guilty for how much they think about all the women around them and how often they cheat in their own minds against their women. That's something to think about as well. So maybe they feel like they have to let their woman dress like that because their mind is just filled with thinking about the neighbor girl, thinking about the cashier, So maybe they just have all this guilt that they feel like they can't, that they're hypocrites and that they can't tell their wife, hey, maybe you should stop dressing like that. I saw another post today, some influencer couple, sorry I don't recall their names, but her husband made a comment like, oh, you're finally covered. And the feminists are blasting him as misogynistic, and you're like, he made that one comment and the feminists are trying to cancel him. That's how rebellious women are today. And so I highly encourage the men to be with women who want to cover, but it's up to you. Because women will follow the lead of men if the men select the right traits. I really do believe that. But if you're going to encourage women to be lewd and then not worry about your own daughter, I think you're a sinful demon. Because Christians will hate how the Muslims dress, and they insult us and call it trash bags. But then they don't think women wearing apple-bottom jeans and booty shorts is that extreme. Or yoga pants. Just think about yoga pants make you look exactly like you're naked. They can see every shape. From cellulite to the shape of your calves, they can see it all. And when women wear the beige ones, it looks like you don't have pants on. But again, I think the MAGA movement has really eroded the Christians. I just was scrolling for the news, and then there was a MAGA swimsuit model. And you're like, and the way she twisted, and I went past it, but Christian men in the MAGA movement are looking at MAGA swimsuit girls. And Christians think there's nothing wrong with that. But they think there's something wrong with a woman covering. See, something very interesting about Donald Trump is that I think he has, because of the way he's talked about women, because Melania has done nude photo shoots, I think that, and he's slept with porn stars, I think that that has made the Christian man more sinful. And the amount of women who become famous for wearing MAGA bikinis and patriot porn, it's really bizarre. But if a Christian was to stand up, like Officer Tatum, he claims to be Christian, right? But he's super into Trump and things like that. And you're like, would he say women shouldn't dress like that? Probably not. So just examine how the Christians today in America, they see how we Muslims dress and have dressed for a long time as extreme, and then they're not noticing the history and legacy of the women who came before them. If you just look at how those saints and those women dressed, you would see, wow, they actually had a higher level of modesty. So the men were actually more in tune with their masculinity because they were able to help the women conform, and the women themselves were more submissive. And then you see again further the trad wife movement that originated in TikTok, where the women were wearing a lot of makeup and wearing certain types of dresses that were sensual, and then they were like, we're Christian, and you're like, should your dress be that short? Should the waist be that tight? Should the dress be that low cut? You have a full-blown face of makeup to make cookies. We all know, if you're honest with yourself, when you're making cookies, your hair should be up, so you don't get hair in the food. Okay? And when you're cooking, you shouldn't have nail polish, because nail polish chips and it gets in the food. High-class restaurants don't allow nail polish. You shouldn't have nail polish on. And there's lots of scholarly opinions that say nail polish violates wudu, so it doesn't let the water permeate into the cuticles, and so you shouldn't have nail polish. But then you can put nail polish on when you're on your period, and then wear gloves because you're not touching the Quran. But still, nail polish gets in the food. And women are not allowed to be in the kitchen cooking in restaurants with their hair down because it gets in the food. And some places they even make you wear a hairnet. So when you're cooking like that, you're doing it to be sensual and eroticize being a woman at home. And with certain foods, when you're cooking, if you have makeup on, you're going to have to go wash your face because the makeup mixed with the heat and grease is going to cause you to have an acne outbreak. Whereas if you're not wearing makeup and then you're cooking oil, I can easily just go right to the sink, get this face wash, wash right there, dry my face, boom, back to cooking, and you can control your acne better. But if you have a full face of makeup and you're rinsing it, your mascara messes up, your eyeshadow, your lipstick, all that's gonna get all messed up, and then you're spending more time fixing it, and who's got time for that? So what's really going on here? What's really going on here is you're just trying to be eye candy. You can have cleanliness and style with being modest. And if you look at like how the prostitutes of England used to be depicted with like really botchy red cheeks, because when you have intimacy your cheeks turn red, at least if you're pale. I don't know how it is for black women, but and then blue eyeshadow and like very jarring thick black eyeliner. The way the decent women used to make their face versus the streetwalker was very different. And so I find it fascinating looking at that angle as well. If you told a Christian woman to not wear makeup, wear long sleeve shirts, long skirts only, and to wear a veil over her hair, how she would freak out and want to dominate her husband, right? But also how the husbands, because they have watched so much adult content, they don't have that sort of awakening, that spiritual awakening of, no, my wife's not gonna dress like that. But the gangster culture as well, where they have made women twerk on cars and throw money on them, and the lyrics of rap songs, you begin to see like, yeah, there's gonna be an element of making men see women as such low beings, and the rap industry has helped that to happen. Tekashi 6ix9ine, all of them, the way that they get women to behave. And now that women have face tattoos, it's wild. I don't know if this is real or fake, but it looked real because of a woman was tattooing Trump on her forehead. It was red, her skin, so it looked, they had the tattoo gun, it was going zzz, zzz, so it looked real. But the fact that someone would be and she was a pretty girl, that she would be such an ignoramus that she would get a face tattoo of a president, that she's so low thinking that she can't realize that's not a good idea. And so the MAGA movement mixed with rap and the Disneyland, Disney, Nickelodeon, MTV, BET, what that did to the Christians in America, you can say, why do you want better women coming from other countries who are Muslims to assimilate into your garbage? Rather, you should look at the immigrant and see how far you've fallen, right? The culture shock should come from us Americans to see how far we have gone. Just because we have tall skyscrapers and DoorDash and Tesla charging stations, that doesn't mean we necessarily have the better culture. We have some good infrastructure, but morally so, I would say we are severely lacking, and by the day we're going down and down. And so, by allowing Muslim women to flourish and bloom, you keep modesty alive. And when men finally realize how dangerous it is to have immodesty, it might be too late for some, because some men can hold off. They can use and throw away women, be cold-hearted, but there will be one woman who slips through the net and then gets you, breaks you, and it hurts your heart. And it usually will be a very immodest, highly sensual, occultic witch. And they come in many varieties. Some of them have been attacking me recently. I mean, they're getting more and more mad that I'm talking about them consistently. But with Muslims in your society, you get more modesty, and it helps the women to be better and helps the men to be better. Christians who think they're modest today, but they're not. They're really, really not. The Christians will have their daughters in bikini at beaches and be like, that's modest. Their daughter will be playing volleyball in booty shorts and, have a sports bra. That's modest. We're Christian. That's why they're a joke. That's why they're a joke. It's really quite ridiculous. So, be bold. Don't feel embarrassed for your superior modest culture. Okay? Be mindful, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. And Muslim women are superior. They contribute modesty to the culture that so desperately needs it. If you'd like to support my work and read more about what I write, you can go to www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there. Please like, comment, and subscribe.